Good morning, brothers.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. It's always good to be in the house of Alpha, especially as we honor our senior brothers. I've been in and around Alpha my entire life. And, as I sat at the table and, listening to two of my heroes, Bob Willis and Jim Wright, go back and forth as they usually do, I'm reminded of what attracted me to this great fraternity in the first place, and that's the brotherhood. I am a only child, and to have people in my life that I can call brother is very important to me. I have my line brother, Quentin Washington. Quentin, if you would wave your hand. We've gone through a lot together, and there's something about that intake experience, that pledge experience, whatever you want to call it, whatever you went through, that builds that bond that is lifelong, that can never be severed. I just appreciate that. And we'll respect your time. I'll be brief in my remarks, but I do want to talk to you about something that has been on my heart, and I call it the Alpha example. The month of June is the month in which we typically reserve to celebrate the men in our life that have provided that example. We call them fathers. Now, not everybody has a biological father. Some people have individuals in their life that might not be their biological father, but they have been fatherly to them. And we celebrate them at this time. Fortunately, I had my biological father in my life. And on May 16, 2013, Dr. William E. Nelson Jr., my father, passed away. Now, although the physical man is no longer present, what he left me is a legacy, a good name, and an example. An example of what a good husband, what a good father, and a good human being looks like. You see, my father was an Alpha man. He loved this great fraternity and served it well over 50 years. My father gave me an example. More specifically, he gave me the Alpha example. So, what do I mean by the Alpha example? I don't know if this ever happens to you, but as I'm out and about and I'll tell somebody, you know what, I'm a part of a fraternity, we might be having casual conversation, they'll begin to guess. And as it just so happens, no one has ever guessed that I'm a Kappa. No one's ever guessed that I'm a Sigma. And no one certainly guessed that I was a Q. Every time someone tried to guess what fraternity I was in, if they knew anything about Greekdom whatsoever, they selected the correct answer, which is Alpha, because my father gave me the Alpha example. Many of you brothers know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the Alpha example. But for the sake of clarity, and for any non-Greeks or Project Excel students in the room, I want to make certain that you understand what I mean. There are 5 characteristics that make every Alpha man an Alpha. The first is that Alphas are first of all. See, the motto of our fraternity is, first of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all. Out of all of those, however, the most important is to be first. The very nature of this fraternity is to be first. It's in our DNA. I was initiated into the Beta Nu chapter of Florida A&M University in the spring of 1994, and during my intake process, one Mr. Moses General Miles, a giant in Alpha, would talk to us and he would say, you don't have to be first as long as you're ahead of whoever is second. To be first means that often there is no roadmap and you are swimming in uncharted territory. It also means that there is an opportunity to discover something new, to build something, to create something that has never seen before, that will have a profound impact on people for years. This was the case with my father. He worked at The Ohio State University for over 40 years and is known as one of the founders of the Black Studies or African American Studies movement, as it is known today. During his time at The Ohio State University, Dr. Nelson created the Department of African American and African Studies, which had one of the first, most comprehensive programs in African American studies in the country. What was so unique, especially for that time, is that he didn't do it wearing a dashiki or African garb. The brother did it wearing a three-piece suit, wearing an afro, and driving a royal blue Mercedes-Benz. See, the brother dressed more like a business professional than an academician. That was intentional, as he wanted to send a message that he was the real deal, not to be underestimated, and every bit as educated as his white counterparts. In addition to the African American Studies program at Ohio State, he had a vision of taking the university to the community. So he did what so many pioneers had done before him. He fought. He fought not only OSU, but the city of Columbus, and is credited with creating the Department of African American and African Studies Community Extension Center, the first and still only community extension center supported by Ohio State University. First of all is an Alpha tradition, a tradition started by 7 men who in 1906 decided to transform a social studies club into a fraternity. A tradition passed down and carried on by such men as David Dinkins, the first black mayor of New York; Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice; Jesse Owens; John H. Johnson, founder of Johnson Publishing, and the first African American to appear on the Fortune 500 for Forbes. And then, of course, our beloved Maynard Jackson, the first black mayor of Atlanta and member of this great Chapter Eta Lambda. I could go on and on about great Alpha first, but our time is limited today. The examples of the men, the Alpha example, has been instrumental in my own life. It has allowed me to believe that anything is possible. In 2001, I, along with my fraternity brother, Terrell Whitley, started Liquid Soul, the first and still only minority-owned communications firm specializing in promoting film and television to African American audiences. In 2005, we marketed our first movie called The Gospel, directed and produced by 2 other Alpha men, Rob Hardy and Will Packer. 4 years later, almost to the date, I left my good-paying corporate job to pursue my career as an entrepreneur. 3 years later, I was named Marketer of the Year by the American Marketing Association, the first and still only black man to obtain that title in its history. See, Alpha men were first. Next, the Alpha example. We're fearless. My pops was no punk. He'll have fun with you, but he didn't play. He wasn't afraid of anyone or anything. This is because of the Alpha example he had seen from brothers before him, brothers like Dr. King, W.E.B. Du Bois, and my father's personal hero, Frederick Douglass, men who fought for our civil rights so that we could enjoy the freedoms that we have today. I don't know about your intake experience, but during mine, I looked forward to poetry. It was the one time we got just a little relief from the brothers. I recited poems that I could use not only on those nights that it got a little tough, but poems that would ultimately resonate within me for the rest of my life, such as The Test of a Man, If by Rudyard Kipling, Don't Quit by Clinton Powell, The Man Who Thinks He Can, and my personal favorite, Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Next, Alpha men were leaders. As I think of my father and the Alpha example he provided, if there were a single word that could describe him, it would be leader. He told me as to be an Alpha is to be a leader. Now, there is a difference between leading and being a leader. Leadership is recognized and given by followers, not commanded by an individual in a place of power. I found that the best leaders don't sell themselves as leaders, but they humble themselves and are more often just trying to do the right thing. Regarding leadership, my father knew that before you can lead others, you must first lead your family, as he believed that there was nothing more important. As a husband, he was married to my mother Della Nelson, for over 40 years and provided constant stability, support, and protection. My mother knew she could always count on my father, and he never disappointed. As a father, he was my superhero and was never afraid to show affection, but always knew when to be firm. Outside of the house, he spent his life advocating for those who could not advocate for themselves, fighting injustice, discrimination, fighting for civil rights, and the decency for black people. It was well known that you didn't mess with my daddy. He wasn't a violent man, but learned that he could do more damage with a pen and paper than he could ever do with his fist. You see, leadership is a characteristic that every alpha man has, even those who don't consider themselves to be leaders. Leadership takes initiative. It requires that one be grounded, empathetic to the needs of others, collaborative, ethical, and most of all, passionate. For it's that passion that attracts others to follow you and keeps you going in those times when you feel like giving up. Alpha men are educated. My father used to say, if you must be something, be knowledgeable. Scholarship is not only the foundational principle within Alpha Phi Alpha, it's also a requirement. You can't be an alpha if you are not in school or have graduated from an accredited university. It's not going to happen. It only makes sense because the very origins of this fraternity started on a college campus. My father grew up in a time where blacks had to fight to have the same access to education as white people. He therefore had an appreciation for knowledge and academics because it did not come easy. He also had an example of who made him believe that higher education was attainable. That example came from my Uncle James Earl Swearingen, his uncle, also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. My Uncle James Earl enrolled in the previously segregated law school at Memphis State University in 1964. He became the evening law school's first black graduate and later became the first black member of the Tennessee Bar Association. In 1982, he was elected judge of the circuit court and was the first black Tennessee state court judge to take the bench by elections rather than appointment. See, again, I tell you, alphas, remember we're first. My Uncle James Earl not only introduced my father to the concept of going to college, but he served as his alpha example and remained so until his passing in 2005. It was because of that example that my father enrolled into Arkansas A&M College, now the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, where he received his BA in history and in government. In 1959, he became a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha, just like his Uncle James Earl before him, pledging the Gamma Delta chapter. He went on to obtain his master's in political science from Clark Atlanta University and his PhD in political science from the University of Illinois. Now, some unfamiliar with our fraternity might say, why is there such an emphasis on education amongst alpha men? Why do we take such pride in being the smartest? Well, for those who don't know, let me explain. It's because education is the antidote to ignorance. Alpha men are fearless leaders. If we are to remain as such, we have to have knowledge. My father would tell me, Nick, not only do you have to know what the white man knows, but you have to know more. He knew that ignorance has an incredibly high price tag. As alpha men, we couldn't afford it then, and we damn sure can't afford it now. We must stop ignorance in its tracks and provide a different example, an alpha example for our boys, our wives, our communities, and the world to see. Lastly, alphas show up. We're there. Our presence is not only needed, it's mandatory. This is because there's power in us being present, being in the room where it happens. Sometimes you don't even need to say a word. Just being there says enough. My father was a scholar, and it often required him to travel domestically and abroad to conduct research and make speeches and attend conferences. Through all of his travels, though, he always had time for me. He always made it home for birthdays, holidays, special events. He was not only here for me, but also for my mother. During the years, he served in his fraternity, and he was there for it, serving as regional and national chair of publications. He also attended meetings and never missed a national convention, being sure to take me along so I could see the example that he was providing for me was just not unique to him, but was a characteristic of all alpha men. I would see such men as Bob Willis, as Jim Wright and their family, and notice that these men all had the same characteristics as my father. They were not just an example, they were the alpha example. In 1994, I can recall crossing my fraternity with my line brother Quentin, and we were preparing to come up before the university, and lo and behold, who shows up? My father. I didn't get it then, but because I have a son, I understand now. It had been his dream since he first learned that he had a boy, that that boy would become a man, and that man would not just pledge alpha, but become the alpha example. Later in life, when his health began to deteriorate, I was there for him, the same way he was there for me. I took care of him. I took care of his bride. I took care of his finances. And when he passed away, I was right there by his bedside with my wife, Tiffany. I was present. Before he passed away, he gave me some final instructions. He said, take care of my wife, don't sell my home, and do no less for your son than what I've done for you. Well, Brother President, I'm happy to report the state of my family is strong. My mother lives 10 minutes away from me. I still have his house, and it's rented, by the way. And my son has been to 3 countries, and my wife is working on a 4th. In closing, as I reflect on fatherhood, I am just so very blessed. On May 12, 2008, the love of my life, Tiffany Avery Nelson, and my best friend gave me the most precious gift any single person has ever given me. And that is my son, Quinn Gabriel Nelson. Just like my father, I have dreams that one day he too will not only be a man, not only pledge alpha, but become that alpha example. And that God willing, when he does cross and we share our secret handshake solidifying our brotherhood, that bond goes from my heart to his. For that to happen, however, I have to continue to provide him that alpha example of being first, being fearless, being a leader, being educated, and most of all, just being there. Brothers, I encourage you. Don't just be an alpha, but be that alpha example. Thank you.